Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington, where we're tracking breaking news amid the intensifying fallout facing the Democratic Senate candidate in Maine, Graham Platner. As now every major Democrat in Congress who endorsed him has rescinded that endorsement and is calling for him to drop out. It all comes after his former girlfriend, Jenny Rassicot, publicly came forward with allegations that Platner raped her in 2021. Platner denied the allegations of non-consensual behavior in a video released on X yesterday, as Rassicot detailed the alleged assault in an interview on CNN.
Did Graham Platner rape you?
By definition, yes. Absolutely.
Because he had non-consensual sex with you?
Yeah.
Forced himself on you? Mm-hmm. Even after you had told him no and fought him off?
Yeah. He violated multiple layers of consent that night by coming into my home when I asked him not to, and by advancing on me when I told him not to, and furthermore, another incident that I had told him not to do. And
with protection.
Yeah.
Rassicot also addressing why she chose to speak out now.
There are going to be people, maybe even his campaign, certainly his supporters, who say this is politically motivated. What would you say to that?
I couldn't disagree more. That was actually one of the reasons that I didn't come out.
Because you agree with his politics?
I do. I really agree with his politics. I think we need somebody with those political stances and who are willing to do the work. And, I see his political videos. They get me fired up as well. I understand why people want someone like him in office. And I felt like me coming forward would potentially take that away. And I felt really uncomfortable with the responsibility and the weight of my story and what that might do.
A source familiar with Platner's thinking tells NBC News that he's still undecided about whether to drop out of the race. The explosive allegations coming nearly a month after he handily won the Democratic primary despite months of other controversies around his candidacy, including allegations from multiple women of aggressive and physical behavior. Platner denied allegations of abuse and rallied supporters around the party's mission to oust Republican Senator Susan Collins and retake the Senate majority. But his support in Washington and beyond has now evaporated. Today, his top backer, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, saying, in light of these very serious allegations, I have recommended that he step aside. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who campaigned with Platner in Maine, saying the best path forward is for Graham Platner to step aside as the Democratic nominee and address these serious allegations outside this Senate race. And Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who endorsed Platner after June's primary, warning Platner that the powerful campaign arm of the party will not invest in the Maine Senate race if Platner remains on the ballot. Other Democrats speaking out publicly as well.
I think Graham Platner needs to get out of the race.
Today?
As soon as possible.
What happens for Maine Democrats? It's obviously a very important
there's
seat.
An opportunity to fill that seat. We saw that the governor had stepped up earlier. I think there are other potential candidates, and the sooner that he gets out, the sooner we can fill the seat.
These allegations are serious, they're credible, they're unacceptable. The Maine Democratic Party has called for him to withdraw. I agree. I'm not a voter in Maine, but I won't support Graham Platner going forward.
Well, my focus has been on my race in North Carolina, but this goes beyond politics. These are disturbing allegations, and I believe that he should drop out of this race.
Today, NBC News was on the ground in Maine, talking to voters about their reaction to the allegations.
While he's an attractive candidate, he has been stumbling repeatedly.
Do you think he should drop out of the race?
I do. I would tell him, nice try, buddy, but get out. You're carrying too much baggage. You're going to cost the election.
Do you feel like at this point he should drop out of the race?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because again, he stands accused of some pretty ugly things. So far, he's addressed all of them in a way that I'm like, okay, but then this one he's denying. So I don't know if that should be allowed to be played out before he has to make a decision.
Do you think if he stays in the race, he hurts Democrats' chances of defeating Susan Collins?
Absolutely.
Would you like to see Susan Collins out of office?
Not for Graham Platner.
And joining me now is Sahil Kapur, senior national political reporter, John Allen, senior national politics reporter, and Jessica Taylor, Senate and Governor's editor at the Cook Political Report. Thank you all so much for joining me. Sahil, what else do we know about the Platner's campaign's thinking of all this? Do you float getting out of the race if you don't actually intend to?
Not usually, no. It's been more than 24 hours since Graham Platner cracked open the door to potentially getting out of the race, and we don't have an announcement. What is he waiting for? Since then, he has been bleeding support left and right from the party. Pretty much all of his prominent endorsers have fled. And we have a brand new article published just moments ago that I worked on with our colleagues Mel Zanona, Brennan Leach, and Bridget Bowman. And one of the things we report in there is that as of this morning, Platner was undecided on whether to get out. And one of the things he's considering is that he wants a replacement who shares his vision and values. In his view, he didn't fight all this way and take this anti-establishment route for this progressive set of values and vision that he cares about to drop out and have an establishment candidate take his place. So that's one of the things that he's considering.
So he feels he has leverage here still.
Well, in a way he does, because the Maine state law says he has until this coming Monday, July 13th, to decide whether to drop out. If he doesn't, then he's stuck on the ballot, and Democrats have to deal with him on the ballot. So if that's the leverage that he has. If he doesn't drop out in time, then the Democratic Party can't do anything to force him off. What the Democratic Party, what the party establishment, what they believe their leverage is that they're essentially trying to signal to him, you're not going to have a campaign. You're not going to have any money. Right. You're not going to be able to run without any support.
So yeah, do national Democrats have any sort of like break open glass plan here? What are the options that Chuck Schumer has if he doesn't get out by Monday's deadline?
Chuck Schumer's task right now is to make abundantly clear that Graham Platner cannot run a viable campaign. What Schumer has done in a joint statement with the DSCC chair, Kirsten Gillibrand, is make clear that they will not spend a penny to fund his campaign, in support of his campaign, to spend any money in Maine to help him win the general election, which is as good as a death sentence against Susan Collins, who's going to have tens of millions of dollars in Republican money. They're deeply determined and committed to try to keep that seat. So without the money, how is Graham Platner going to be able to run? Without any prominent endorsers in the Senate who have all fled, how is he going to be able to make the case that he could be an effective senator? Some of the endorsers who supported him and have now fled: Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren, Martin Heinrich, Ruben Gallego, Ed Markey, Chris Van Hollen. I can't count a single Senate Democrat who's still supporting him.
Well, John Allen, I want to turn to you. On the flip side of that question, if Platner drops out, who could potentially take over?
You know, there are 1,000 flowers in Maine that could potentially bloom. A lot of people looking at this, a lot of people being looked at in Maine. The one that the progressives have quickly rallied behind is Troy Jackson, the former Maine Senate president who had run for governor and lost in the primary. A couple of the other candidates that ran in that race and lost: Narav Shah, the former Maine CDC head. And then you've also got Congressman Jared Golden, who is retiring, somebody who might be convinced to try to get into this if Platner gets out. But a whole bunch of candidates: Governor Janet Mills, who of course lost to Platner in the primary. A lot of possible candidates, none of them ideal. Susan Collins has won 5 terms in the Senate already. She's been there for 30 years for a reason. She is difficult to beat, and Maine Democrats have not been able to find anybody to beat her in the past. So they will be in a quandary. Even if Platner were to get out right now, in a quandary about how to fill that seat with somebody who might actually compete against her.
You know, John, we did have a Republican strategist on the show yesterday who said that the best Democrat to beat Collins is a generic Democrat. So, could all this turmoil actually end up helping Democrats if they can find this replacement candidate?
Yeah, the political graveyard is full of generic Democrat.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no such thing, and to the extent that somebody is a generic Democrat, they often lose because they have not offered something to the voters that the voters want. I mean, I think one of the things that was popular about Platner, and you hear this from the people behind him, who are looking for a new candidate now, is that they liked the platform, the policies that he was pushing. I'm not sure that Maine does as a whole like that, but you would think that in this era that you're going to have to find a candidate with some energy, with something that makes them tick them, something that connects them to the voters. This is, a pipe dream of consultants that you can find candidates who are going to just run fine and be fine and not be the other candidate and win. Sometimes that works, occasionally it works. But I think the Maine Democrats have their work cut out for them in finding a solution after Platner.
Yeah, certainly not a very great bumper sticker, right? Keeping it generic, a generic Democrat.
Gabe, that's if he gets out. I mean, as Sahil was just pointing out, he's the one that makes that decision, like Joe Biden in the Democratic presidential nomination in 2024. Completely up to him.
Well, thanks, John. Jessica, I want to turn to you on what this means for Democrats' chances in Maine and also for their chances of retaking the Senate. Let's start if Platner stays on the ballot.
If Platner stays on the ballot, I think the seat is gone. Then I don't see Democrats having a chance. Yeah, we would shift it considerably in Susan Collins' direction because National Democrats have already, as Sahil said, that they will not spend to try to flip this seat. They have distanced themselves from Graham Platner in every possible way that they can. He would be abandoned by the National Party.
Well, what if he drops out and this, replacement candidate comes in, even from a, progressive cloth? Does that a generic candidate, stand a better chance?
Absolutely. Even before all of this, Graham Platner had so much baggage that he was teetering right on the edge of being, unelectable. And then this latest accusation of rape, I think, was a red line for many voters. And, for someone who's talked about being the white working class savior almost, he was really, his approval ratings were upside down in polling. He was doing very badly in rural areas of Maine that you need to win. This is where other challengers of Susan Collins have, where she has been successful before in holding on to those rural working class voters that may have split their ticket and voted Democratic for president, but continue to vote for Susan Collins.
So realistically, is there a path for Democrats to win the Senate without Maine?
There is one that exists, but it's a very, very narrow one. The entire path for them to win the Senate is still narrow at this point anyway, because if you flip, North Carolina is the likeliest to flip at this point. We have that open seat race rated lean Democrat. Maine should be the next on the list. Without that, with Maine, they still have to flip 2 states that Donald Trump carried by double digits. So if you don't include Maine on that, they have to flip 3 states that Donald Trump carried by double digits. Yeah. Neither of those scenarios is ideal.
Yeah, quite a tall order there. Where do you expect Democrats will focus their resources if they cut Maine loose?
I would look to Iowa. I think that, beyond the next possible are 2 seats that we have in toss-up, which is Ohio and Alaska, and those are must-wins to get to 4. But if you need that 5th seat, if something happens in Maine, Iowa is a much cheaper alternative. They have a very solid candidate there in State Representative Josh Turek, who has a very compelling personal story. He's a former Paralympian in a wheelchair. He's running against Ashley Henson, a Republican congresswoman, who is running a very strong campaign. But I think there are some seeds of discontent in Iowa this cycle, dealing with the economy and with agriculture prices. That Iowa, there's also 3 congressional seats that are very competitive, and the governor's race is a toss-up as well. So I would look to Iowa.
Texas might make a play for that too, right?
Texas is so expensive. I put Iowa ahead of Texas right now.
Interesting. And Sahil, I'll finish with you. How loud do you expect this drumbeat to get over the next coming days?
Extremely loud, because this is the kind of the prisoner's dilemma that the Democratic establishment and Graham Platner are caught in. He won't have a viable campaign if he runs, as Jessica was pointing out. He has an extremely slim path to victory, but it's his choice. By law, he's entitled to this nomination. He did win it, and nobody can force him to get out. So if he can extract something in exchange for stepping out, this seems to be the negotiation. This seems to be the Cold War that he's stuck in. But like I said, the National Democrats have made abundantly clear, including Bernie Sanders, who, when I spoke to Graham Platner in Maine on the ground, he said Bernie Sanders is kind of his political idol. One of the reasons he's running is to mirror his style of politics, and now Bernie's saying, get out.
That's right. Sahil, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.